Hello, welcome back to Tail 3 Cabins. It's about 65 degrees here in northern Ohio, which is a perfect time for us to start getting our RV in shape. We've just spent the last couple days getting the water back on, cleaning it from top to bottom, changing some filters here and there, and overall just getting it prepped to take a little trip down south. We thought we would try to beat winter, even though it's 65 degrees today. Tomorrow it's going to take a turn, and our whole way down south, winter is going to be at our heels. We're hoping this is going to be a good trip for us, get away from some of the colder temperatures in March up here in northern Ohio. We're going to try to stay away for about a month, so we're hoping that this will be a nice trip and a nice little getaway, get to some warmer temperatures, although it looks like it's going to be a pretty rainy start. Maybe when we get back to northern Ohio, it'll be just in time for the temperatures to warm up a little bit, which is a nice thing. So why don't you stick around, check it out. I'm going to be heading out tomorrow morning, and when we leave it's going to be about 50 degrees, but very rainy. Our first stop is going to be somewhere in the middle of West Virginia. It's going to probably be about 45 degrees when we get to our destination. My concern is that next morning we're going to take off again, but the temps are going to be in the low 20s. 22 is what they're saying right now. I'm a little concerned about some of the water pipes that I have underneath the trailer, especially if we're towing and moving and that wind's blowing. That could create a problem for us. So I'm crossing my fingers that it's not going to be as cold as they say it is. Maybe we'll delay our departure a little bit to see if maybe we get those temperatures up to close to freezing before we leave. Our first stop is just a quick overnighter. We're just trying to put on some miles as we make it to the East Coast down by South Carolina. We had a very windy night and the temps were in the low 20s when we woke up, 22 degrees. I had wrapped those water pipes up with a towel and some bungee cord just to keep them warm overnight. And I'm a little worried we're going to be moving here shortly. It's still about 27 degrees as we get ready to leave. We didn't even pull out the mattress or set up a bunk. We just put the mattress right on the floor. That temperature on the left there is the compartment temperature. It says 38 degrees, so my compartments on the outside did not get too cold, but the air temperature out is about 22 degrees right now. There are two tunnels that we have to go through heading through Virginia going into North Carolina. Towing that trailer does do a number on my gas mileage. I can only get about 180 miles off of the tank because my tank is only 23 gallons. Coming out of the second tunnel, you enter Mount Airy, which is right there by the border, North Carolina and West Virginia. It's pretty much a downhill ride, but we got caught in some traffic, which delayed us for about 90 minutes. We were at a standstill. It was obvious that there was something serious up ahead with a couple ambulances, some fire trucks, a tow truck, and of course state police. I ended up cutting this one a little bit close. The tank's 23 gallons. There's 22 and a half. Long travel days are pretty tiring to begin with, and it didn't help having the extra 90-minute delay. So it's to bed early. Willow left plenty of room for Karen to get in. As we head south, we wanted to stop at Myrtle Beach. We used to frequent here quite a bit when the kids were younger, and we haven't been here in many years, so we thought we'd just check it out for a couple days. And there's a few things we want to take care of while we're here. We can add West Virginia and South Carolina to the trailer's travels. All right, I'm down here in Myrtle Beach. It's our second day down here. Yesterday was pretty much a washout with the rain and everything. But tonight, I'm hoping these clouds behind me clear out because SpaceX is going to be sending a replacement crew up to the International Space Station. And the launch is still on for tonight. Even though Cape Canaveral is a couple hundred miles down that way, the rocket should still be coming by. It'll actually be coming up this area and across this sky. And if these clouds would get out of here, we'd have a pretty good chance of seeing that going by this evening. 6 more hours to go. We'll see what happens. See you around 11:15 this evening. Now, you might say that is an incredible shot of a rocket. But unfortunately, it's a mediocre shot of a jet airliner. We happen to be right next door to the Myrtle Beach airport. Luckily, these planes don't land all night long. They usually stop around 11 o'clock at night. But you can tell it's kind of foggy out. There's some low clouds and some high clouds, so seeing this launch is going to be a bit difficult. Now if you look closely, you're going to see a little red dot kind of dance around in the center of the screen, and that is actually part of the launch taking place down in Florida. I only captured maybe about 5 to 6 seconds of it, and then it got lost in the clouds. There will be some more launches in the next couple days, and we're going to get closer and closer to the Space Coast, but for now the clouds are our nemesis. Now had it been clear, this is probably what I would have seen off of the dock, which would have been very cool to see this come across the sky. This is some footage from my friend Brian, who lives down here part-time, and he's seen a couple of these go by, and this is some of the footage he shot. This one is from another one where the sun had just set. You can kind of see the two stages. The second stage is on the left, and the first stage is over on the right-hand side. Depending how long after the sun has gone down, sometimes you'll get a jellyfish effect, and you can see a little bit on the right-hand side, but it's more pronounced when it's darker. The gentleman that shot some of that footage, Brian, we took some time and visited them for a little bit. I used to work with Brian on the fire department, and we both retired within about 4 or 5 months. So it's nice catching up with him, his wife Diane, and Tango.
Hey, Willow. Get your umbrella. Might rain. Stay here. Tango. My mom and dad never gave me an umbrella.
After the puppy settled down a little bit, we went out and got a bite to eat, caught up a little bit more on some things, and had a nice visit.
4 in the morning, so with her, and then we had that one, which was a bigger,
higher bed?
yeah, and he didn't want her to get hurt.
The state park is nicer than I thought it would be. They have their own beach. They also have their own fishing pier. The fishing pier is free to walk on, and it's open all night long if you're staying in a campground. So if you're an avid fisherman or like to go fishing very early in the morning or late at night, that's a great advantage. Willow made a big impression with folks down there as usual, and she also got on the Instagram account at an attraction which is known as Barefoot Landing. Last time we were in the Charleston area, the temperatures were in the mid-90s and it was very humid. This is more tolerable. If you're going to visit Charleston, South Carolina, there's a lot of history here. Also, I would recommend you go out to Patriots Point. In the past, we've taken the kids out here to see the aircraft carrier. They had a destroyer, a Coast Guard cutter, and a submarine. But the aircraft carrier is the star of the show. Definitely worth taking a tour of the USS Yorktown. The previous time we were in Charleston, we were able to tour all the naval ships, but now we want to go out to Fort Sumter, which is about a 25-minute boat ride off the mainland.
Take a seat.
Hey, y'all, welcome out. If you'd like to join Ranger Andy for his history talk, he'll be in the grassy area to the left. It's $10 for every video appearance I make.
Oh, nice. There's 20.
Yes!
So we built about 4 dozen of these forts around the country. Where do you put a fort? Well, you put a fort somewhere based on the range of the guns that you're going to put in it. At the time these 4 dozen forts were being built in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, before the U.S. Civil War, the maximum range of the most common cannons was about 1.5 miles. There were 2 forts already out here at the mouth of the harbor. Fort Johnson is about 1.25 miles ahead of your ferry boat right now along this sandbar. And that sandbar did not exist. That's new real estate. Okay, we had 1 mile of open water, 360 degrees around Fort Sumter during the Civil War. So Fort Johnson already existed, and Fort Moultrie, 1 mile this way on the other side of the main ship channel. From each other, those two forts are almost 3 miles. When you have 1.5 mile guns that are 3 miles apart, it creates some dead space. So this is where the Army chose to construct the island. Took 15 years and over 100,000 tons of rock thrown over one boulder at a time by enslaved laborers to make the island, and another 15 years and the installation of almost 4 million bricks to build the walls up to their maximum height, which is delineated by that red stripe on the flagpole up there. So that was the height of the walls in November of 1860 at the time of the presidential election. 4 men running for the office. 3 of them say, we want all of the new states joining the Union from the Western Territories to come in as slave states or to vote as to whether they're going to be slave or free. And most of them would have voted to become slave states because the cotton enterprise was sweeping westward across our country. And to make money in the cultivation of cotton, you need lots of land and you need lots of cheap labor. One guy running for the office, tall, skinny guy from Illinois with an excellent hat, he said, I want all of the new states to be free states. That was terrifying to the Southern plantation and slave-owning oligarchy, because if elected and that policy came to bear, then the very delicate balance of power between slave and free states in the Congress would be upset. So Lincoln's name did not appear on the ballot in 10 Southern states. However, he cleaned up in the rest of the country and got more electoral votes than the other 3 candidates put together. 6 weeks after Lincoln was swept to victory, South Carolina said, that's it. We quit. We secede. We are no longer part of the nation. Why South Carolina? Well, at the time, South Carolina was the most densely populated slave state in the nation. 57% of all the humans in this state were property at that time. When South Carolina seceded with a vote of 169-0 in their state legislature, they published a document and they said, we cannot live in a nation whose chief executive does not support the expansion of slavery. Lincoln was not an abolitionist at that point, merely an anti-expansionist. Slavery could exist where it was, but he didn't want it to go where it was not at the time. A week after South Carolina declared its independence, the entire United States Army in Charleston, all 85 soldiers, moved from their headquarters at Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island across 1 mile of open water to Fort Sumter just after dark the day after Christmas. Why? As soon as the U.S. Army moved out here, the militia of South Carolina took over Fort Moultrie, took over Fort Johnson, took over Castle Pinckney, that little island fort that you passed on the way out, and started putting guns on Morris Island, which is about 3/4 of a mile to seaward of us on that side of the fort. The commanding officer here figured that they could last until the middle of April, at which time they'd have to evacuate or get resupplied because they would have eaten through all their supplies. 2 significant things happened before the middle of April. In February, now of 1861, 6 more states joined South Carolina in seceding, and the Confederate States of America is formed. And then in March, Lincoln is inaugurated. Lincoln's been in the White House about 3.5 weeks. He says, you know what? I don't want those U.S. Army soldiers leaving that U.S. Army fort in the middle of Charleston Harbor. So he sends a letter down south saying, I'm sending down the Uber Eats, just provisions, no war material, leave it alone. As soon as the Confederate States gets that letter, a delegation leaves Fort Johnson, comes over here, finds the commanding officer, says, hey, commanding officer, his name was Anderson. Hey, Major Anderson, pack your trash and leave. And Anderson replied, gentlemen, you have your orders, I have mine. If we are not fated to meet again in this life, may the Lord grant that we meet again in the next. And the delegation went back to Fort Johnson. The first Confederate shot was fired about an hour later. It was a mortar round. This is a mortar on your far right here behind me, this little short squat thing. It fires a projectile way up high in the sky. That mortar came from that Confederate site. It is possible that was the mortar, statistically unlikely, but possible. Anyhow, it was fused to explode at its apogee. Think fireworks in the middle of the night. And that let Confederate guns in 4 different locations know that the fight was on. Firing went both ways for a day and a half, and at the end of that time, the largest building on Fort Sumter was on fire, and it ran around the whole back wall. We can only see 100 feet of the back wall, but there's 200 feet to our left that you'll be able to see where it was. It's all gone now when you get up on top of the fort. But that building housed the powder magazines. So Major Anderson had to pull all his troops off the firing line, put them in a bucket brigade to start putting out the fire. When the cannons firing from Fort Sumter stopped, all the cannons firing at Fort Sumter also stopped. Another delegation came out and said, hey, Major Anderson, you're out of food, you've not been resupplied, and your fort's on fire. What are you thinking? Major Anderson, West Point graduate, war veteran, not a stupid man, he replied, and I'll paraphrase, I'm thinking we're out of here. And so a ferry boat came, the U.S. Army troops loaded aboard, they were taken out to the same U.S. Navy vessels that were bringing them supplies that were anchored outside of Confederate cannon range. They were repatriated to New York, and that began a 4-year occupation of this U.S. Army fort by the Confederate States Army. Nobody bothered them for the first 2 years, but in the summer of 1863, all of that changed. This little island over here, Morris Island, you'll be able to see it. There are 2 islands, one to the north of us with a lighthouse on it, and one to the south of us with a lighthouse on it. The one to the south, that island was and still is uninhabited. It's just got a lighthouse on it. The U.S. Army attacked in the vicinity of that lighthouse in the summer of 1863. Some of you may remember the movie Glory, starring Denzel Washington, Matthew Broderick, Morgan Freeman from the late 80s. That's about the combat exploits of one of the very first African-American units that was allowed to fight for the United States. That happened on Morris Island in July of 1863. Once the U.S. Army is ashore, they bring their larger, more technologically advanced rifled cannons ashore, and they start shooting at Fort Moultrie, at Fort Sumter, and downtown Charleston. The fort that we're standing in was fired at over 44,000 times over the next 18 months with projectiles that weighed 100, 200, and 300 pounds. And that's why the walls don't reach up to the height of the red stripe on the flagpole anymore. In fact, behind me, ma'am, wave your hand. Right behind this lady, on the left-hand side, you can see the back end of one of the projectiles that's stuck in the wall. And there's 2 more over here. There's a sign that points them out. If you can't find them, just find one of us. We'll point them out. So that's 2 of the 44,000. You can find the other 43,997 on your own. That was a joke. Come on. All right, I'm almost done. Early in 1865, the Confederate States abandons Charleston militarily. They take all their troops out, and the next day, the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy roll right back in here. President Lincoln is so happy, he says, you know what? I want to have a symbolic victory ceremony at Fort Sumter, since that's where this whole thing started. So they dust off Major Anderson. He still had the flag. The flag that's flying is a 33-star replica in size and configuration to the flag that Anderson had here during the first battle and then brought back to re-raise on April 14th, 1865, 4 years to the day after he took it down, not knowing whether it was ever going to fly again anywhere, much less here in Charleston. That would have been the most important day of the war, but you've not heard of it. And the reason is that the same day the president decided to go to the theater did not turn out so well. So had Lincoln not been shot on the evening of 14 April, we all would have learned 14 April 1861 and 14 April 1865 as bookends for the majority of the Civil War. After the war, the fort fell into disrepair. This big black thing was just a technological refresh. It happened in 1899, about 35 years after the war. It's built out of concrete, covered with tar to waterproof it, 2 big guns up there. And then on the other side of this big black thing from us, you'd expect to go back down to this parade ground that used to run to all 5 walls originally, but you won't, because there's 20 vertical feet of sand over there. And the reason...
While we're on this side of town, I really want to go and take a walk on that bridge, but before that, we're going to get a quick bite to eat. So just heading out, just on the other side of Patriots Point, there is a little parking area where you're allowed to park, and then there's a walkway that leads you up to the bridge. Once I got on the bridge, it was a mile before I got to the first stanchion. It's pretty cool that they made this nice path on the bridge so you can walk it, you can hike it, you can jog it, you can run it, bike ride it. Just really neat, nice scenery, good exercise. It's being used by a lot of folks. Back at our campground just outside of Charleston, a little bit of maintenance to do. Karen's doing some laundry. We're going to put some carpet on our steps so maybe our dog will be not so paranoid about going in. And a nice little walk every evening.
What time are you scheduled? All right. Let's get up. What you need?
So horse-driven buggy rides are pretty popular in the town of Charleston. It gives you a nice, slow, leisurely ride through the town to see some of the architecture and learn about some of the history.
But I'm pretty sure that's wrong. No, Buster, Buddy. I give up. We got all these horses coming back. Mally, we bought her mama. Her mama's name was Victory. Bought her at an auction, like most of our horses. But she was about a foot shorter and about 400 pounds lighter. At the same age. Then let's give them a decade to figure out, I don't know, where to build a city. Would be a good idea. So 1680 for the establishment of St. Philip's. This is their third building. They lost one to a hurricane and one to the museum in 1770. And in March, the new leaves just push the old leaves off. That's why you say live oak. Our oaks are green or they're dead. Life expectancy on an oak is about 300 years. Because it would be 10. Gets very confusing. But we all need to be sitting up there like Kindle, glass of tea, waving at people. This one is divided into condos.
Just a side note, you might think that there was a heavy rain, but this street floods out frequently now with the high tides.
On the direct waterfront until the 1820s and 30s. Because in the 1700s,
As we finished up our buggy ride, I met with a friend that I haven't seen in 35 years who now lives in Charleston. He moved down here about 8 years ago. Not too far from our campsite is a tree that's estimated to be somewhere around 300 years old. I'm pretty sure this is where the elves make the cookies, but as much as I knocked on the trunk, no one would answer. Things are winding down in Charleston. This was another nice state campground that we stayed in. And tonight we're serenaded by bagpipes. So that's going to do it for today. I'm going to share the rest of my trip with you, maybe next week, maybe in 2 weeks, and then we're going to get back to some work and some tractor videos. But I want to share the rest of this trip because my ultimate goal is to go down to the Space Coast and hopefully see a live launch. We've traveled all these miles and it's kind of nerve-wracking when you see the launch schedule, and sometimes it gets postponed, sometimes weather affects it, sometimes there's other issues. But we have 6 days on the Space Coast, and hopefully, crossing our fingers, we're going to be able to see something go up. Or maybe not.